Hello all, this is Jenny Nauman with Children's Literature Course EDC 230 for Del Tech. Tonight we're going to review chapters 1, 2, and 8 and discuss some of the things that go along with that. I'm very excited to do class online and hope that this is helpful to you. Any links and extra things that go along with this PowerPoint or video will be put on Blackboard. Okay. So, you have 3 chapters that we're reviewing tonight. It's chapters 1, 2, and chapter 8. The first chapter that we're going to be reviewing is elementary children's literature. We're going to talk about what is lit for children, genres of literature, book formats, and also schema building when it comes to literature. Okay, so let's start with chapter 1. What is children's literature? And as you go on, and it's starting on page 2 of your book, they define children's literature for you. So what do you think children's literature might be? If you've read it or not, take a few minutes, jot down a note or two for yourself. If you're sitting next to a friend, chat with them. But what does children's literature mean with you, to you? Okay, now that you've had time to think about it, children's literature isn't necessarily just books for kids. Children's literature can actually be a little deeper than that. The hard part is the discussion about quality. One definition of children's literature requires the work to be of good quality, but who actually judges that? Poor qualities like stodgy writing with plots that are too predictable, too illogical, or didactic. However, it's really hard to determine because, again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What is quality and what is not quality? So that'll be a discussion that we have later on in chapter 2. But when we look at defining literature for children, you look through pages 2 through 4, and then from there it talks about how kind of children's literature were born. And it's kind of, I like the chart on page 6 of your book. It's box 1.1. And it has stories that were written back in the 1800s and early 1900s. So, for example, Treasure Island was 1883. Little Women was invented in 1868, or written, not necessarily invented. Wizard of Oz was 1900. So these are truly books of children's literature that were written many, many years ago that are still relevant and used today in our everyday classroom. Very exciting. Okay, when you think about children's literature, there are many different genres. On page 8 in your book, box 1.2, it talks about the different genres of books. The first is the early childhood books, which are when children are learning to read or just learning even what a book is, how to hold it properly. They're your concept books, alphabet books, counting books, general books, pattern books, those kind of things. And sometimes they're in that board book fashion so kids can stick them in their mouth and it doesn't matter. They're learning even just the right way to hold a book, making that important as well. Traditional literature, which we're going to discuss in chapter 5, where we have myths and fables and legends and tall tales, and this is the category that your fairy tales fit into. We have those as well, and we'll be looking at that later on. Fiction we'll be looking at in chapters 6 through 10, which is like fantasy, animal fantasy, contemporary realistic fiction, historical fiction. Then the next genre is your biography and autobiography, which we'll look at in chapter 11. Informational books is the next genre, or nonfiction, which we'll look at in chapter 12. And poetry and verse we'll look at in chapter 13. But those are different genres of books. So when you speak about genre and books, genre means a category or a kind of book. Children's books also have different formats. You have a picture book, you have easy to read books, chapter books, hardcover book, paperback books, grocery store or what they call merchandise books, and series books. More information about these types of books is listed in page 11 through, I think, page 17 of your text. I love series books because if you can get a child hooked on a series, then they tend to continue to read because it's something they like, and then they get hooked, and then they continue to look for more series and books. I love it. Also, and lastly, in chapter 1 is schema. Throughout this class and throughout your tenure as a teacher, you're going to talk about schema. And what schema is, it's all the stuff that's already inside your head, like the places you've been, the things you've done, all the experience you've had that make up who you are and what you know and believe to be true. When we use our schema, it helps us use what we know to better interact with text. And this is important to build this with the youngest of readers. On pages 20 all the way through to the end of the chapter, page 24, it talks about pre-reading schema building, how to do it at the beginning, and then also how you model the process. This will be something that we focus on in class as well as that's mentioned on our midterm. So please make sure you read the schema pages in our book. Our second chapter is the elements of quality literature. In this chapter, the main focus is on book awards, literary elements, and we'll talk a little bit about literature circles maybe at the end. So chapter 2, if we look at book awards are a bit controversial. Take a second to read through pages 28 through 31 about the different book awards that they mention, please. Okay, as you've had a chance to kind of look through here, we have, there's the Newbery and Caldecott, which are very famous, I guess, awards. Laura Ingalls Wilder, the Hans Christian, and the Children's Choices and Teacher Choices. What makes these a bit controversial is that all of those awards are award-winning awards that adults select. So it says in here, adults select all the award-winning children's book and lifetime awards given to authors and illustrators. Even the Children's Choice Awards are given to books that adults have pre-selected for the kids. So in our day and age, I hope it comes out where kids are really can have their own kind of book eventually. But the purpose is to recognize some of these amazing books that are written for our kids. So that, you know, it's a good and a bad purpose, but again, it goes back to what is quality and who's voting on the quality. So also in this chapter, we talk about the literary elements. It's a big piece of literature and big things that you'll need to know as a teacher. And these are mentioned on page 35 through 39. So you have your characters, your point of view, setting, plot, theme, writing style, and tone. And all of those put together are what make a great fiction book. One way to talk about literature are literature circles. And that's mentioned on page 43. And this is a great way to turn kids onto books. It allows them to respond to what they read by sharing their own thoughts with others. And these are small temporary discussion groups that for kids who have chosen to read the same book. So you may give 4 or 5 books, but it has a lot to deal with choice. So children feel like they are bought into the topic of it. So very, very important. Also in this chapter, it talks about developing a classroom library. Start now. Start collecting books at yard sales or ask them for gifts at Christmas time, or go on Amazon when they're really cheap and buy some, but start building that classroom library so when you're a teacher in 2 years or more, you'll already have started that collection, because it's one of the most important things you can have in your classroom. Okay, we're going to move on to chapter 8, which is culturally diverse literature. This chapter should really help you in writing your multicultural annotated bibliography, which is actually due next week. So if you turn to page 172 in your text, that is the book on the culturally diverse literature, chapter on it, excuse me. In this, we're going to talk about evaluating culturally diverse books, categories of multicultural books, and creating your bibliography. So first, every class that we meet, we're going to have a focus book. And our focus book this week is Aunt Flossie's Hats and Crab Cakes Later by Elizabeth Fitzgerald Howard with paintings by James Ransom. There's a YouTube link here at the bottom that will take you to, and I'll send this and put it on Blackboard and send it to you in email, that will take you to the story of this book. You can either read it or you can watch it or both. But after you read it, and you're going to be asked a few questions, and that's what you'll respond to on the discussion board, and that you'll use your chapter to help you answer, which is really good. So evaluating culturally diverse literature is on page 174. And as you go through and read this book, Aunt Flossie's Hat, I want you to ask yourself and answer the question, is it quality literature with a worthy theme? Was there stereotyping? Were there multidimensional characters? Is the language in the book authentic? Is the portrayal of the culture realistic? Are all cultural details accurate? Are there omissions or distortions? And does the book help children value their own heritage? This will be on your discussion board. And so really think about this when you watch the video and or read the book. Also in this chapter, they ask questions about the books to determine if they're culturally neutral, culturally generic, or culturally specific books. And I want you to think about this, and you can even write about this in your annotated bibliography. So culturally neutral books contain some characters from minority groups or have culturally diverse faces portrayed within illustrations. However, there's no culturally specific information included. Generic books focus on characters representing a specific culture, but there's literally little culturally specific information included. The characters in these books are depicted as ordinary people existing within the larger American culture. Culturally specific books incorporate details that help define the characters as members of a particular cultural group. In these books, ethnicity is more than a superficial mask. There's a mix of distinguishing characteristics of the minority cultural group. So those are the three types. So think about these now, and you can read about them on page 174, but this will also be on your midterm. Okay, so when you create your annotated bibliography, this is how you do it. Take a minute to look at an annotated bibliography for Aunt Flossie's Hats and Crab Cakes later. Okay, thank you for taking time to read that. So that's an example of what you need. There's also some examples on Blackboard as well. And then next week, what's due, or right now, if you haven't already, please introduce yourself on the discussion board ASAP. You have your multicultural bibliography due. Please call with any questions. That's for 10 books. Read aloud presentations that were scheduled for 125 will now be on 215. It's February 15th, so be ready then. Your journal prompt, you'll be able to see it in your email, and it will also be on Blackboard, and you'll need to answer that in your journal. And then your discussion board questions based on Aunt Flossie's Hats and Crab Cakes later will be due on February 1st at 10 p.m. And that will be in the discussion board, and I'll also send you those questions separately. So if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. I hope this format worked out well for you. You can listen to it as many times as you like, or just once is fine too. But let me know if you need anything else. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.